Hi, my name is Angela, and I'm a white woman. Right now wearing a ponytail, brunette, and yeah, my background is just a straight wall painted in white, and nothing interesting, nothing else. Today, we will be interviewing her. Very happy to be here. You can go
Great.
on.
Okay, I'm Lilian Gonzales Brown. I identify as he, her, she, and I'm living in Surprise, Arizona at the moment. I'm wearing a multicolored diagonal striped top, and I've got kind of beige walls behind me with some art hanging there. And I've got short brown graying hair. And I'm happy to be here. So thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Lillian. So let's get started. How did
Okay.
you even get to meet Ed Roberts?
Oh my God. It was a lifetime ago, it seems. In the late 1970s, I had a friend who introduced me, a friend who had cerebral palsy, and he introduced me to some other folks with disabilities who were working with Planned Parenthood about making their services accessible to disabled people. And so we all worked on that together. And as a result, I was asked to apply for a job at CIL, the Center for Independent Living in Berkeley, which had been open for about 4 years then. And at that time, in 4 years, had grown to be the second largest employer of the city of Berkeley, outside of the university and the city itself. So that gives you an idea of how quickly it had grown. And so I applied for and got a job working in the Independent Living Skills Department and peer counseling. And that's where I met Ed and his mother, Zona, who was getting her degree as a therapist at the time. And so she was doing peer counseling with parents of kids and adults with disabilities. She was great. I mean, like when we were working with parents and they just were being so protective of their disabled kids who could be in their 20s or 30s.
Yeah.
Ed would say, well, bring my mom in, and we would call Zona and she would sit down. We'd bring the parents of the disabled person we were working with in, and she was great. She just cut through all of the crap, so to speak, and she would say, well, and so when was the last time the two of you went on a date? And what are the two of you going to do when you're, for your daughter or your son when you're not alive anymore? She just really cut through it all. And so that was the beginning of me getting to know Ed and Zona socially, and then working.
Whoa, thank God for people like her, like his mom, right?
Yeah. And for Ed, Yeah.
Of course, that sounds like you guys work so hard. And I mean, it did have great results. You did so much for the community.
Well, Ed was fearless. I mean, that is something that really struck me from the beginning. And I mentioned Zona in the beginning because when he contracted polio when he was 14, 15, at that time, it was considered you'd be in an iron lung and your life is over. And Zona would be like, that's not the way this is going to happen. And she made sure that he got an education at school. And when he wasn't going to graduate from high school because he hadn't taken physical education or driver's training. I mean, can you imagine if you don't learn to drive a car, you can't graduate from high school, really? And so got together with a friend of hers and they went to the school board with Ed and fought it, and Ed was able to graduate. And then when UC Berkeley didn't want to let Ed in as a student, they went to Washington and said, what is this business? You have to make your colleges accessible. And a lot of people in the background helped. But Ed just never took no for an answer. And he had this kind of magical way about him of not, becoming belligerent and angry. He just sort of very nicely didn't take no for an answer. And he would just say, well, let's explore some other possibilities of how we might approach this problem or this whatever. And I could go on so I'll let you get a word in edgewise.
Of course, yeah. Well, and little did Berkeley know all of what Roberts had to offer. My goodness. Thank God he finally got in.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I mean, sounds like Ed really played a really important role in your life and in his peers' lives in general.
Yeah. Well,
tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah. I mean, when he started at Berkeley, he found a couple of other disabled people that were of college age and said, listen, we need to work with this university to make things accessible. They lived at the hospital on campus in a special ward for disabled students because the dormitories weren't accessible. And so they really worked hard to get the university to make the dormitories accessible so that they could be with the other students rather than in a hospital setting. I mean, really? But that group of people in the hospital also knew other people with disabilities in the community who were not students at UC Berkeley, but, we're looking for personal assistants, which they called attendants at the time, to help them get up, get dressed, eat, whatever they needed. But they couldn't avail themselves of the services that Ed and his friends were getting at UC Berkeley if they weren't students there. So that was when a core group of people said, well, maybe we could apply for some federal money and get something started. And that was the beginning of CIL and on the federal level, they were like, oh, sure, let's throw some money at these crippled people. They don't know what they're doing, And I mean, look what happened, and Ed got the university to start making it possible for them to recruit other students as personal assistants because he was attracted to women and he didn't want to go on a date, with an attendant that didn't know what they were doing. And so, he fought to get a motorized wheelchair for himself because he was using a manual wheelchair and had to be pushed everywhere. He just fought to have a life the way that everyone else has a life. He was a very creative thinker that way.
And I mean, it sounds like it was a whole legacy that he left for everyone, including myself as a disabled young woman. Now being able to go to university and everything. It means everything to me.
It's a couple of stories. One is that Ed flew to Germany one year on Lufthansa airline, and he flew into Munich, but wanted to fly to Frankfurt. And the airlines said, well, no, we can't let you do that because you have this breathing device and it's not safe on the airplane. And he said, it's not oxygen. It's just a respirator using the air from the room. And they said, no, but we will take you to the hospital at the airport until you can make other plans. So he said, do you mind if I use a telephone? Oh, of course, of course. And so he called the Minister of Health in Germany and talked to him. And the next thing he knew, the airline staff came to him and said, please, we'd be so happy to take you on the plane. And I mean, that's the way he did things. He didn't say you people are idiots and fighting. He just, made things
peacefully got things through.
And one of my favorite stories is I had a friend named Clive who lived in London, and Clive had severe scoliosis, so that he had a barrel chest and his back was really strongly concave. He was about 5'4", and people used to stare at him all the time. and had made a lot of fun of him in school and so on. So he led a very kind of quiet, reclusive life. But it had always been his dream to come to California and learn about the disability movement. And so I had a chance to meet with him, and we became friends and corresponded and so on. And then he, a few years later, wrote to me and said, I have to start using a respirator at night. I'm so depressed. My life is over. I can't do anything. I'm attached to this machine all the time and so on.
Yeah, that narrative.
Yeah. And so I tried to comfort him and to say, you know, there's ways to work around this and so on. And then Ed came to me one day and said, Lillian, I've got this chance to go to England and I want to travel. Do you know anybody that might be able to get me a van that will hold my iron lung and so on and so forth? So I said, well, let me call my friend Clive. So I called Clive and he got on it right away and found a van for Ed to use for a month traveling around Europe or England. And so then I went to Ed and I said, Ed, you know, I've got this friend Clive and he's really depressed because he's, you know, starting to use a respirator and he thinks his life is over. And do you think that you could possibly find any time to talk to him when you're there? Ed said, give me his phone number. Ed invited my friend Clive to travel around England for a month with him for free.
Wow.
I mean, I get tears in my eyes when I think about it because it changed Clive's life. I mean, he spent months thanking me every 5 minutes for doing this. And he saw how Ed lived with much more significant breathing issues than he had. And changed Clive's life. He started traveling. He went to Egypt. He went to Israel. He went to all these countries that he had wanted to visit. And
wow,
that was Ed being Ed.
Yeah, you know? He truly went from just surviving to living his best life, basically.
Yeah. And, you know, he was known as kind of the grandfather of the disability movement. And I'm not going to say that Ed was.
He still is.
Movement. Yeah. But at a conference in 1991 in Canada, there were people from 88 different countries with disabilities. 88 countries. And some of them had never met Ed when disabled people in their country started. But but most of them had heard of Ed at least and had benefited from the seeds that Ed planted in the 1970s in Berkeley, California. That is huge.
It is. It truly is.
Yeah.
And
he never made himself important, you know, he never made a big deal of who he was, you know. It was very human.
Yeah, he seemed like that type of person, just very feet in the ground, you know.
I mean, he spent what, 16 hours a day in an iron lung, especially in his later years when he was getting older, and it never stopped him from inviting people from all over the world into his living room to visit with him. While he was in the iron lung, talking to them and being fed and, you know, whatever was going on. It's great.
Yeah. And we're talking about all these anecdotic things. When was the moment you realized he was a game changer? He was not just another activist. Someone.
Well, you know, when he finished at Berkeley and then eventually he became the head of the Department of Rehabilitation in the state of California and moved to Sacramento, which is the state capital. And then a few years later, he moved back to Berkeley to start the World Institute on Disability. And he had gotten an award from the MacArthur Foundation as a genius in the work that he did. And he took that money and he put it into helping to start the World Institute, which exists still today. And I think at that point, I wasn't working at CIL anymore. I'd gone on to do some other international work. But I was fortunate enough that when international visitors came to the World Institute, they would call me to arrange their program and so on and so forth while they were there. And it just, Ed was Ed to me. But hearing other people talk about him and seeing him through their eyes, I just realized that this man was in the homes of people all over the world. And, he would talk to church leaders, not because he was particularly religious per se, but churches were exempt from making their buildings accessible and stuff. But he would bring church leaders together, and suddenly they were revamping their churches and talking to their community about reaching out to people with disabilities. And he did a lot of his work to eradicate polio in the world through church leaders and stuff, because he knew that they would talk to large congregations. I mean, in Malaysia, the churches, 1,500 people go to mass for one mass on a Sunday.
Well,
you get a church
that's not pandemic friendly.
Yeah. You get a leader talking about reaching out to disabled people in the community. Yeah, that's huge. And that's Ed.
Yeah, he was huge. His work was huge.
Yeah.
Like you just said.
It was like he found a way to make things bigger in ways that most people didn't think, and was great at connecting. You really should talk to this friend of mine over here, and you guys over here should talk. And great things happened. When CIL started, Ed didn't say, "Oh, I have to be the leader here." No, he contacted somebody else and said, "I think you should be the founder." So, I don't know if I'm painting a picture that is clear for you, but, and I think
you are,
maybe I'm sounding like, Ed was a god. I mean, Ed fell asleep.
He kind of was.
He always was late for stuff. And he could be in a shit mood sometimes, he was a real person, not a god.
Exactly.
But I don't think I have ever met anyone like him. Just one more short story. A friend, I was doing some work in Sweden. I've been going for several years doing, starting independent living centers in Sweden. And I met a young woman. She was maybe 18, 20, somewhere in there. And when she was 16, she had an aneurysm to the brain. And it left her nonverbal and paralyzed from the neck down. And
big change.
Huge change. The Swedish health system was great. She had personal assistance 24/7 and so on, but she was living with her parents. And by the time she got to 20, she was like, "I want to live on my own." Well, first of all, communicating with her was an incredibly slow process. And she was using computers to do that and so on. And she was using like a joystick that she would click her jaw and it would indicate things on the computer. But I thought to myself, if at the age of 20, she's doing this, she's not going to have a jaw left in 10 years. And so anyhow, we talked, the group of us in the class that I was teaching. And then I went home and I went back the next year, and she had moved out of her parents' home. She had attendants come in, personal assistants come in when she needed them. She didn't have them with her 24/7. She said she was willing to take the risk that if the building caught fire or something like that, maybe she couldn't get out. But everybody took risks in their lives. Well, from hearing stories about Ed, she hadn't even met him, she decided that she could take risks in her life. And she came to a computer conference in Los Angeles and learned all this new computer technology that she took home to Sweden to improve her communication skills so she didn't ruin her jaw. And she started teaching a computer class to people with disabilities in Stockholm.
Wow.
That is how Ed changed people's lives. They never met.
They really did.
They talked, but yeah.
He made things so much easier for us younger disabled people. He built a path. to accessibility. We're still working on that, but he was huge on that.
He was. I mean, things like curb cuts in the street, they didn't exist until a group of disabled folks went out in the middle of the night and started pouring cement on the street corners. It was
something as simple as that.
And now
was huge.
Curb cuts are all over the world. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like such a simple thing, but it changes people's lives.
It really does.
I'll let you get a chance to say something now.
Wow. And can you find 3 words that kind of describe his personality and what he meant to you as a person?
Heart. He had a huge heart. Unbelievable vision. And inspiring. Being inspirational is a term that people misuse so much, especially around disabled people. Oh, you're so brave, or you inspire me. And it's because I'm buying a can of tuna fish at the supermarket. Ed was inspirational. Yeah. Inspired people.
For sure. He was really passionate about what he did. And like you said, also fearless. He wouldn't have done all of these things if he had stopped himself at every little thing, thinking too much about it.
And a 4th word is funny. He was very funny. He had a great sense of humor.
About being funny, can you tell us a funny story that you can remember?
I remember we were at a party once, and I was feeding him, which meant that he had to throw his breathing tube out of his mouth and be fed and eat and swallow and put it back in. And I wasn't fast enough, and so he started making these really awful faces and throwing himself around, and people around him panicked. And I put the mouthpiece back in, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I just wanted to make you feel guilty." He wasn't having any trouble at all. I don't know.
Things like that.
Things like that. He just, he made fun of things that people sometimes took too seriously. I'm racking my brain trying to think of funny stories. And
there must be so many.
I know, and my mind is like, oh,
yeah, it happens to all of us.
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Okay. Yeah, and do you know why he considered becoming an advocate for this community? Did he ever talk to you about that?
Because he was a man of vision, and he really believed that things were possible. When he fell in love with this woman on the UC Berkeley campus, most people as significantly disabled as he was could move 2 fingers in one hand. That was it. And I mean, he could move his head back and forth.
Pretty much, yeah, of course.
And he's thinking like, oh, that woman's kind of hot. I'd like to ask her out. And
he's disabled but human.
Yeah.
Let's not forget, we're all human.
Yeah, about falling in love and getting married and having a child. I mean, those are things that nobody thought was possible back then.
Not even now, honestly.
And not even now, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Ableism just
is rampant, yes, today.
Really?
Still, and Ed did a lot to, I just remember when his son Lee was little, like 6 years old or whatever, and he used to stand on Ed's battery pack in the back of his wheelchair and hold on to the handlebars, and then they'd take off into the sunset.
As a child, that must be great.
It was great, but it was just sort of like when people were like wanting to pat him on Ed on the head and say, "Oh, you poor thing," and Of course, they never thought Lee was his son. They thought Lee was a little boy that was the son of one of his assistants or something.
Unimaginable.
And Ed'd like just take off and scare
Whatever,
the heck.
What do you think youth should be advocating for to carry on with Ed Roberts' legacy? Because we don't want to forget about that.
Oh, good grief. No. I think focusing for a moment on this country, independent living centers are in trouble, with funding and so on. And I think that needs to be improved. Educational opportunities, so there's employment opportunities for people with disabilities.
Of course, one thing leads to the other.
Yeah, and an expansion of the ADA, because people with disabilities are still in this country thinking if they can get in the door of their apartment, it's accessible. That's not
it's
it.
2021, people.
Yeah, exactly. And that the answer to hearing impairments isn't cochlear implants for everybody, that there's so many different approaches to things, and we need to expand on that. We need healthcare desperately.
The U.S.'s healthcare is a mess.
Yeah,
thankfully me living in Spain.
Part of my disability that I didn't have diagnosed until I was 40.
Wow.
is brain fog. And so sometimes, if you ask a question and it's not what I'm concentrating on, like my brain won't go there. So
I deal with it too. So
great.
You're safe here. I get you.
Yeah. And just for the record, my disability is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which when I was diagnosed at 40, they had only determined 3 kinds. Now they've determined 18 different types of it. So a lot has changed.
No, I've loved hearing about all the stories, and not just the stories, about your point of view. Okay. And to conclude all of this, what would you think would have been Ed's dream for the disability community today?
A dream for the disability community today. For people with disabilities to be able to live in their community and have the same opportunities as non-disabled people, to be able to take public transportation, to be able to live in the community, to have a job, to be in relationships, to be able to get in and out of buildings. All of those things are not possible today for far too many people.
For most of us.
Sign language interpreters. Everyone thinks it's a big deal that television is captioned. I don't know if you use captioning. I do, because my hearing is going. Captioning
I don't, but I know it's some people I know do need them, and it's not a good fix. You can barely understand what they're saying.
Yeah, all of those institutions around services for disabled people employ an awful lot of people. And
most of them who are not disabled.
Right, and they're making a lot more money than we are as people with disabilities. So that needs to change. That really needs to change. Wow, it's been wonderful hearing, like I said, not just stories, but all of his contributions, and how you collaborated with him during all of his journey. I just want to kind of close by saying, when Ed passed away, they had to open a large gymnasium on the UC Berkeley campus to accommodate the hundreds of people that came from all over the world for his memorial. Wow. It was amazing. It was amazing. And it's because he changed so many people's lives. So he really did. So I hope that you learn more about him. Oh yeah, it was lovely.
I'm so thankful to be here to have this opportunity.